Hi, I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Welcome to another edition of Half Hour on the Hill, a cable TV show to update constituents about what's going on in Beacon Hill, often what's going on in the district. And I'm very proud and very pleased today to have Lindsay Kennel, the Legislative Director of the Massachusetts AFL-CIO. So Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And we've gotten to know each other fairly well over the past year. How long have you been at the AFL now?
About 5.5 years. I started right when COVID kicked off in 2020.
Yes, so that's probably why we didn't see each other as much in person. So,
yep.
But 5.5 years. Most people know what the AFL-CIO is, but if you could describe a little bit what it does and sort of its footprint in the state.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a federation of labor unions. We're often described as the umbrella of labor for the state of Massachusetts. We represent about 500,000 union members across the state and about 850 local unions across the state, and that ranges from private sector to public sector to some cross-sector unions, so personal care attendants and similar folks who are kind of public sector workers, kind of private sector workers.
Mm-hmm. It does seem like a lot of different sectors. You have the trades, right? You have government workers, you have some white-collar professionals, is that right?
Absolutely. I'm one of those white-collar professionals.
Yep.
One of the unions we represent is the Office Professional Employees Unions. But we have healthcare workers, rideshare drivers recently,
Yes.
Grocery workers, building construction trades workers, the MBTA employees, kind of a whole host of folks.
And that sounds like a real challenge to work with all of those unions with a legislative agenda.
Yes. Our president, Chrissy Lynch, describes it, our org, as a mile wide and an inch deep. We have to cover a lot of issues, and we can only cover them to a certain degree. So we really strive to find those issues that we can bring the most unions on board with as possible to push things forward through.
And that sounds like being a legislator. So.
Yeah, pretty similar. Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously, you're up at the State House a lot. If you could talk a little bit about, what was your path to becoming the legislative director at the AFL? I know you've done work on Beacon Hill for other legislators and other organizing. What is some of your work, and how did you come to the AFL?
Yeah, so I originally wasn't planning on being super involved in politics. And then a little election in 2016 happened while I was in college, and it really kind of spurned this desire to do something. I got an internship with the Democratic Party under Gus Bickford and Veronica Martinez, and kind of kept going back to the Democratic Party. I kept extending my internship, got an opportunity to do field on a lot of campaigns, so a lot of your colleagues now, Andy Vargas, Jim Hawkins, Senator Friedman, and eventually kept leaving the party to go run and do campaigns, come back to the party, and kind of the back and forth of political organizing was a bit of a burden at a certain point, so I decided I met President Lynch back when she was the political director, working with unions to help Paul Feeney get elected down in Foxborough. He was also my hometown senator, so we got to know each other on that race. She had a job open for a political legislative organizer at the AFL and brought me on, and I've just been able to kind of stay on, build up more of my policy portfolio, and move into the legislative director role. That
is terrific. And how long have you been the legislative director then?
About 1.5 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, so when President Lynch came on, we had a couple of openings for legislative director. Our political director became our secretary treasurer, which is the equivalent of like a vice president in another similar organization. So we had an opening for political director, and they're really great about professional development and building folks up. So we were able to kind of move into the director roles.
That is terrific, yeah. And of course, I worked very close with Steve Tolman, previously a colleague of the Senate, and then president of the AFL. Appreciated his work. I would also say, though, that Chrissy and really the whole team, including yourself, I think have sort of brought the AFL to the next level as far as outreach, as far as legislative agenda around issues around equity. If you could talk about some of the shift or changes by the AFL to really address not only all those challenges but the federal environment we're in now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we've struggled with at the AFL is, because we represent so many different interests, how do we best represent those interests to legislators? And I think as the legislative landscape has shifted, labor was a little slow to adapt. Some of our unions were phenomenal at doing that, shifting more into bringing workers up to the State House instead of just having a single person try to represent those values, which used to be the way it worked, but things have shifted. And so I think President Lynch has done a great job of shifting with it. We've noticed too that increasingly individual bills don't get brought forward to the floor in either chamber. Things move via more omnibus legislation. Rather than tackling one part of an issue, how do we tackle a larger part of the issue at once? And we were an organization that really focused on how do we get 100 co-sponsors on this one bill, and we really just push the bill forward. I like to look at our legislation now more as a series of building blocks. So each bill has a certain number of blocks. What can we take out of each bill and attempt to file as an amendment or push through a larger bill, maybe even attached to the budget in a way that's appropriate, so that we can move as much forward as possible instead of just sticking our feet in the mud and being stubborn about one thing. I think a perfect example of that was the climate bill that y'all passed last year. We were able to get good labor standards on clean energy storage projects and labor standards on the procurement of those projects, which is great for our kind of climate jobs legislative campaign, to make sure we're building a clean energy economy that also cares about the workers building the economy and doesn't leave behind the workers in the traditional energy sector.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a good example of how we had a bill that we filed that didn't go anywhere. It was redrafted and it was reported favorably, but end of the session, things tend to die off. We were able to instead take some of that language, file it as an amendment in both chambers, and get it passed, and it is now the law. They just announced 2 weeks ago that the first of those solicitations are going out for procurement, which is awesome. So we're going to see some projects built with really strong labor standards.
That's fantastic.
And I think as we've seen the federal landscape really shift, we had an awesome opportunity with the Biden administration, but as we know, a presidential term is really only 2 years between running for re-election and trying to fix whatever the previous president did and trying to pivot to the next year. You don't have a lot of time to work with. What the Biden administration was able to do on the IRA and the infrastructure law was really awesome. The labor standards attached to that were awesome. Unfortunately, we're seeing all of those get repealed now. And we're really nervous about the impacts of Project 2025 on union members. Our kind of focus of the last 8 or 9 months has been on how can we inoculate Massachusetts workers as much as humanly possible from the impacts of the Trump administration. Of course, because it's the federal government, we're somewhat restricted in what we're able to do and how we're able to do it. We have some legislation that we filed that I'm happy to talk about more in greater depth, but we've also been focusing on how we can partner with the Healy administration on some of their immigration work to protect our immigrant workers here in Massachusetts. How can we make sure employers have the tools they need to protect their workers, and also potentially offer pathways to workers to stay here and work here with the authorization they need or the pathway to citizenship that they need. And really, we're just trying not to be naive. And that's on the policy front. I think we also, as a labor movement, have to do a bit of a reckoning. 2024, our members didn't vote as overwhelmingly Democratic as we would have wanted. Certainly didn't vote as overwhelmingly for Harris as we would have wanted. And there was certainly a little bit of dissension within the labor movement about who to even support in the
Sure.
election.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've heard time and time again from focus groups, polling, and research that the National AFL-CIO has done is that the state of the world is not working for working people.
Right.
And pretending like it's working just so you beat the other guy isn't a winning strategy. If you can't afford your grocery bill, people don't care that you got labor standards on the Inflation Reduction Act. They care that they can't afford their groceries. And if you're defending the status quo while the other guy is saying he wants to destroy it, you know, specifics aside, you can understand why working class people weren't 100% with the Harris campaign.
Absolutely. And I'll say, I just
Yeah.
recall the President Biden, when he was running for re-election, often saying, the economy is great, we're doing all these great things, and I think he certainly did do a lot of great things, but there were a lot of working people that weren't feeling it, or had, you know, high food costs or inflation, and therefore it wasn't an obvious choice for who for them to vote for.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're trying to do a better job about how we talk to our members internally. Of course, in Massachusetts, we can always say it's Massachusetts, we're always deep blue, we have an overwhelmingly Democratic legislature, our congressional delegation is 100% Democratic, but increasingly we're seeing apathy towards elections, towards elected officials. So while we still might be, you know, deeply Democratic, and that's certainly the party that supports labor unions more than others, we've got more and more of an opportunity really to change how we talk to our members, help them understand more what we're doing when we do policy, what legislators actually do, and what you can do, what you can control versus what you can't control, and also putting the blame where the blame should be, which is on corporate multi-billionaires, multinational corporations that are making it harder for people to get by, that are making it harder for legislators to do their jobs, for regular people to do their jobs, and want to destroy the kind of fabric of the American economy as it stands right now, and certainly the protections that we've worked really hard for as a labor movement to protect workers from that kind of corporate overreach.
Absolutely. And in terms of that organizing, it must be a challenge to sort of, you know, as the legislative director for the AFL or any other staffer, how do you reach all those union members, especially with you said over 800 unions, is that right?
Yes, so it is a lot. I think the best thing that we can do is provide resources to our affiliates so that they have a better, closer relationship to their members. We joke we have 500,000 union members that we represent, but our direct membership are the leadership of the unions that represent those workers. And so what can we do in terms of fact sheets, in terms of talking points, opportunities for people to engage with their legislator, contacting their legislators via phone call, email, coming up to the building. How do we provide those opportunities for folks so they feel empowered over their own advocacy and take ownership over their advocacy, so it's not just, you know, those AFL staffers up on Beacon Hill going to do the work, but they feel like it's work that they're doing for themselves too.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about the legislative advocacy and obviously the legislative agenda. We're just going to take a little break here. We have Lindsay Kennel, Legislative Director at AFL-CIO, and we'll be back shortly for the next part of Half Hour on the Hill.
All right, look at you taking the stairs. Who are you?
We're your lungs. We are proud of you for quitting smoking, but you still may be at risk for lung cancer.
A routine cancer scan can detect it early when it's more curable. Good to know. Well, I gotta go somewhere.
So do we.
Listen to your lungs. Get a routine screening that could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org.
Hi, State Senator Jamie Eldridge back for the second half of Half Hour on the Hill, talking with Lindsay Kennel, Legislative Director of the Mass AFL-CIO. And first of all, Lindsay, I want to say earlier in the show, I really appreciate your description of the sort of legislative landscape about actually how to get policy passed. As you said, as I'm often trying to explain to my constituents, there are what we call moving vehicles. There are bills that are definitely going to pass whether it's climate legislation, economic development, the budget, and how do you fit in any organization's legislative agenda into those bigger bills, even if it's part of the legislative agenda. So that's really helpful. What is, for this session, the AFL's legislative agenda? What would you say are sort of the top priorities?
Yeah, so we endorse dozens of bills every session. So I want to make clear we have a very broad legislative agenda. But I think we have a couple of bills that for the first time this session, we've taken the responsibility of drafting, finding sponsors for, and filing. And these are bills that cover topics that impact nearly every union or a large swath of a particular sector that we've kind of helped coalesce the coalition around to push forward. There are, again, dozens of other bills like related to climate, wage theft, which is a perennial bill that will hopefully one day pass. But the two bills I think I'd love to touch on are our legislation to address Project 2025 and its impacts on unions, and then our legislation to provide worker protections against artificial intelligence. On protecting workers from Project 2025, we filed the Protect Labor Act, which thank you very much for co-sponsoring. I appreciate it. It just received a favorable report to Ways and Means, which is exciting. It is on its way in the Senate. But this bill is our way to address the very real possibility that the National Labor Relations Act, which is the federal law through which all private sector workers have the right to unionize, if that gets repealed or overturned, private sector workers in Massachusetts lose a score of rights. They can't form a union, their collective bargaining agreements might not be entirely enforceable anymore, their ability to strike and have collective action goes away. And unfortunately, because that's a federal law, Massachusetts has no laws to provide those protections for those workers. Historically, Massachusetts has done a great job of shoring up our labor laws where federal law leaves a gap. For instance, federal law doesn't cover domestic workers or agricultural workers. We do in Massachusetts. So what we're saying is, if there's a reality we know is coming or word is coming, how do we shore up those laws here? And so the Protect Labor Act is a trigger bill. It would only go into effect if the NLRA were to fall or the National Labor Relations Board says they don't have jurisdiction over a certain group of workers. And it would cover all private sector organizing. We think that's about 150,000 to 200,000 of our members. It can be difficult to ascertain an exact number. And it would also cover all other private sector workers. So your right to talk about your working conditions at work as a private citizen, in a union or otherwise, that's still protected by the same law that allows someone to form a union. We need to protect that right as well. And so the kind of trigger would be if Congress acts, if the Supreme Court acts, if the National Labor Relations Board acts, this would go into effect. We borrowed the idea of a trigger law from the right wing. Prior to the Dobbs decision, and while Roe was still good law on the books, dozens of red states across the country passed really strict abortion bans that would only go into effect if Roe was overturned. Roe was overturned and all of those trigger abortion laws went into effect. It'd be the same thing here. So we're looking for a proactive approach for the legislature to be able to take. And it would certify those federally recognized unions under state law, and the Department of Labor Relations would kind of take over from there on out. The other bill that we have is called the FAIR Act, an act fostering artificial intelligence responsibility. Labor unions aren't naive to the fact that AI is here, AI is staying with us. These kind of automated systems are a part of our lives now. But we can be responsible about how those systems are used in our lives and are used in the workplace. The FAIR Act is kind of oriented just around how AI is used in the workplace. We view AI as a tool for augmentation, making someone's work life better, helping remove menial tasks, improve menial tasks, allow someone to potentially even do more work without automation and fully replacing workers.
Yep.
And so this bill covers that regulation in three ways. The first is protecting human autonomy and expertise. If I am a healthcare provider who has been practicing for 20 plus years, I have a certain knowledge of how to practice medicine in a way that a machine just doesn't have the human experience to do. Healthcare workers need to be protected in their right to disagree with, for instance, a diagnostic from an AI system or a dosage from an AI system.
And not say is very frightening. Yeah.
Absolutely. And not face retaliation at work for using their judgment. Doctors will be among the first people to tell us that some AI softwares are really going to improve their ability to care for patients, but they need to have the trust from their management to know when and when not to use those systems. The other elements are kind of similar. They're about having that human in the loop, they call it, human responsibility within AI. So the kind of other two buckets are worker surveillance, or surveillance of workers, I should say, and automated decision systems. So we say spying on employees is illegal under federal law. Just because AI is doing it doesn't mean it's not spying. It's kind of that simple. An AI system can't be used to listen in on conversations in the workplace, track how long someone takes to go to the bathroom, that kind of information, and certainly can't be tracking whether or not they think an employee might be interested in forming a union.
Absolutely.
Which there's already a company out of California called Perceptix that tracks a union vulnerability index for workers.
And I'll just say, it's just so disturbing to me that you have so many often tech CEOs that sort of think that they don't have to follow these laws now, you know.
It's horrifying, and they're often deploying these softwares against their own workers. So it's a cyclical kind of nature that these tech oligarchs, I'll say, are kind of entering into. And that ties directly into the idea of AI in making employment-related decisions. So if you're subject to discipline at work, or you're up for a promotion, a human being should make the decision about how you're disciplined, when you're disciplined, how you're promoted, when you're promoted, those kinds of things. An AI system could be used to help track certain metrics. Like you did 5 reports last week. The AI saw that you did 5 reports. A human being needs to go back and look at those reports and see kind of how that plays into your ability to do your job and whether or not you should be,
Right, the substance of your work,
Exactly, absolutely.
Yep.
And again, we're not saying these tools can't be used to help. Certainly, if you need help drafting an email, and ChatGPT can be a tool for you, you as an individual should be able to have the right to choose to do that. But whenever you're required to do that, we need to kind of take a step and look at the restrictions around that. And certainly employers should not be able to sell your personal data as a part of having to use an AI software. So those are kind of the two big bills, the Protect Labor Act and the FAIR Act. We have a briefing for the FAIR Act in a couple of weeks.
Oh, good, good.
So we'll see where that goes. Protect Labor Act, we're actively working with Labor and Workforce Development to move forward. I believe you're a co-sponsor on both bills, so thank you very much. I think you're a co-sponsor on all of our bills, so again, thank you very much. But yeah, those, AI and Project 2025 are kind of existential threats to workers right now. And so those are 2 bills that we filed to hopefully address those threats.
That is very helpful, and I think it's also at a time where I think more and more Americans are finally paying attention to what's happening at the federal level, directly in their lives. So that's very helpful. You mentioned the progress and success in last session's climate law, and I have a district that's very focused on climate action and the environment. Often, I would say, more focused on the policy and not as much on the workers. If you could describe a little bit what the AFL was able to insert into the climate legislation and how that sort of protects and supports workers who are doing this important work.
Yes, absolutely. So we really view climate as really an existential threat of our time. Not to overuse existential threat as a phrase, but unfortunately that's the era we're in.
Yeah.
Climate change is impacting workers constantly in not just the workplace, but also in their communities. It's rising water, it's unclean air, it's polluted land. Right, like we are workers at home and on the job site. We are whole people, and we have workers that do quote unquote like bad energy work. They are work in the fossil fuel industry. They maintain our gas pipelines, which means they heat our homes. They provide electricity to our homes. They are people who were grievously injured in the Merrimack Valley gas explosions. Like those were our members, and they also did the cleanup to help folks afterward. And so we look at climate legislation as how do we honor the work that our fossil fuel workers do and provide them a just transition as our economy moves away from fossil fuel, also helping our workers transition away from fossil fuel, and then also provide the opportunity for new energy, green or clean energy, to be built with good, strong union jobs. So we were able to do two things in the climate legislation. The first was a commission to study the impacts on fossil fuel workers, to get a really strong sense of how many workers are going to be impacted, how are they going to be impacted, and when are they going to be impacted by this transition. And then on the other hand, we don't produce enough energy in Massachusetts. We have to procure it from elsewhere.
Right.
And when we procure that energy, it has to go somewhere before it goes to people's homes and businesses. So that's clean energy storage. On clean energy storage projects, we were able to get labor standards when the state buys that energy. So those labor standards include, have you ever had a labor dispute in your company? You need to disclose it. Are you committed to using registered apprenticeship programs? Are you committed to paying the prevailing wage on projects? So ensuring that we are not sacrificing quality work and underpaying workers as we build the green economy. We can both protect workers and build a green economy. And so that was a way, two small pieces of the puzzle of climate change that we were able to really move things in the right direction. And in the governor's, in her energy bill, she filed two big bills related to the climate this year. In her energy bill, we were also able to get more labor standards kind of included there. So as that moves through the process, we're excited to partner with her administration to move that forward. And we're grateful that the governor has really prioritized our members as it relates to energy and climate, because it is something we need to bolster en masse while also making sure we pay homage to the workers that are, gonna lose parts of their livelihoods, and hopefully we can get them livelihoods in a different industry, but ignoring the problem does not make it go away, and it doesn't stop the impact on those families.
Exactly. And if we're creating all these clean energy jobs, whether it's solar, offshore wind, geothermal, energy efficiency, they should be well-paying, there should be benefits, there should be protections, and that is a true, as you said, just transition.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I appreciate your work on that, and thank you so much for detailing some of the larger pieces of legislation by the AFL-CIO. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Pleasure to have you. And thank you to those watching Half Hour on the Hill today. I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Thanks for joining me.